Come on, I'm called this Mr. Nisha Coin. One texted me last night saying about do you want to do a couple of football or to introduce Sean or whatever, and I don't really know what he meant, but we'll try our best here. So Sean's topic or theme is, no United Ireland on a word on fire, and that's sort of like in the climate debate of United Ireland politics and all. Even from my own self, like coming up in the over and being involved in Republican politics through Seán Fearon and stuff, there was always that environmentalism in the background, but it was almost sort of like don't litter, look after the mountain, and gardens are good, flowers and vegetables, you know what I mean? It wasn't real critical, political analysis on it, and Sean did very much carried that when I was younger and came in over and with himself, but the conversation there around colonialism, and it's linked to all these sort of topics we're talking about, mental health, housing, whatever else. I mean, they're inextricably linked with the term and whatnot, and it's all part of the same process, and that started with industrialisation and capitalism coming about, and dualism, this separation between nature and humanity. It wasn't a coincidence. Like before capitalism, nature and humanity more or less lived in harmony. People sort of lived off the land, and that's sort of the given. When industry and industrial revolution took place and capitalism emerged, dualism took place, and that was deliberate to justify exploiting the land. That the land was there for humans, man, and specifically they abused for profit. And that's the same with mental health. I mean, like dualism came about, and it also split, man or humanity, and the physical and the mental. And I've talked about by a lot of people nowadays, and as Gabor says, as you were saying earlier on, and he talks about it and like at length that capitalism and neoliberalism has separated mental health between the physical. And if you go to a doctor with autoimmune disease, they give you a tablet or whatever else. No, they don't ask you about stress. They don't ask you about the environment. You live in poverty, trauma, whatever else. It's the same thing, vice versa. They're inextricably linked, and we'll come around that hopefully in this time, but and I'll go back on the United Ireland a bit. Ireland lost its forests, its language, its ownership of land, all in that same colonial process. And just to take a wee quote from the Extinction Rebellion's handbook of Black and Rhodes and whatever else, they say, let me see, the extermination of biological diversity and indigenous cultures that know how to live in peace with Mother Earth is a part of the one extinction, one interconnected war against life. Ecocide and genocide are the invisible process, and they begin with the idea of colonisation of the earth as a civilizing mission of a superior race. So that's sort of the introduction to the conversation. And just Seán Fearon himself, when I was 15, 16 coming over and developing that sort of kind of politics, Sean was sort of leading the front of that, challenging not only the politics itself, but in the party and whatnot, whether it been FDI, foreign direct investment, women's reproductive rights, and very much so in the environment. And academics can be maybe lackluster and feel it back up a lot of times, but Sean's not one of them, as I find, and his work in Queens around the SICA, around environmental inequality, mentioned with John Barry, he's very much to the fore of tackling the environmental crisis we face, whether up in protesting in Queens and succeeding and getting the adapt policies and whatnot. So more of it, gonna help you with it, Seán Fearon.
Thank you, and very generous introduction, I have to say. But this presentation is based on a paper myself and John Barry have written. We're not getting into, as I say, the technicalities, boys, all the day, because it's the last sort of talk of the day and all. But we sort of felt, just in the course of activism and throughout the number of recent years, the debate around Irish unity is dominated by one central idea, one central economic model that has taken hold, and that is almost like a common sense now in the debate, and it hasn't been challenged. So not only from an ecological point of view, which we'll talk about here, but also from a social point of view as well. All right. So this is related to Irish unity, but what I'm going to try and do is introduce the ideas of post-growth and degrowth. Just as a start off, who here has heard of as an idea like post-growth and degrowth economics? You've heard the term? Yeah? Okay, good. Look, because it basically sounds counterintuitive, right? The idea of degrowth sounds like recession, it sounds like economic disaster. But so this is what we'll go through today. an introduction to that sort of idea of post-growth and degrowth economics. The economic literature as it exists on Irish reunification at the minute, so all of the papers that are out there that basically says what are the benefits of United Ireland in economic terms, and critically analyse that and say, well, is it all that it's chalked up to be, and what are the social and ecological costs of this? Summarise that, as I say, get into why it's socially and ecologically unsustainable, and then why a new post-growth idea for Irish unity is needed, or a new Ireland, the stuff that we've been talking about here today. So, look, the first point here, the economy doesn't exist in thin air. It is part of a fixed and finite global ecosystem, and all that means is when we think about the economy, we're talking about this basically flows of money. We give our labour to firms, they produce goods and services and sell it back to us, and this flow of money around the economy is essentially just the idea, and it's all measured in one big number called GDP, right? But is growing GDP a good or a bad thing? Well, it absolutely depends. And the analogy I'd like us to think about when we're talking about what the economy actually is, and what ecological economists talk about, is it has a metabolism, right? So think about the human body. We bring in energy for us to be able to, go about and do our daily work and do the things that we need to do, and then we produce outputs. We don't need to go into what they are. The economy is much the exact same thing. It takes in energy and matter from the earth. It produces the goods and services that we need to exist, healthcare, buying stuff out of buying a few pints, whatever it is, and then it has outputs that it pumps out into the planet. Basically, the scale of that economy, the amount that it is taking in and the amount that it is putting out, has completely breached the size of the earth to be able to sustain that. And the idea is that the economy is now far too big. And that's measured in something that's called GDP. So as Sean was talking about there, GDP can be measured either as expenditure or as income. Whenever we go in and spend somewhere in the shop, that's somebody else's income, right? But that is four things. It's wages, rents, profits, or dividends. But before, say, COVID and after the financial crisis here in the north, in that 10-year period, wages did not increase basically at all. Real wages did not increase at all in the north. So if the economy is growing every single year and our wages aren't going up, what is going up? Rents, profits, and dividends. Economic growth is increasingly meaningless to the improvement in our lives. For a lot of the period of the 20th century, which I'll go on to now, it did have a massive correlation. It was more public services, more hospitals, more electricity to homes, more schools, all this sort of stuff. Right now, it's buying shit we don't need for people we don't like, and it's producing and consuming not for the sake of us, the benefit that it adds to our lives, because beyond a certain point, and the evidence shows this, beyond a certain point, buying stuff doesn't, you satisfy your rent, you satisfy your food, you have a few things to keep you entertained, a few pints, whatever it is. But beyond that, it doesn't add to your welfare, it doesn't add to your material well-being. So we only consume for the benefit of producers, and crucially, those who own the means of production, like going down that road. So the idea I'm talking about here, this breach between the size of the economy and the earth, the ability of the earth to sustain it, this is something ecological economists would call the Great Acceleration, right? So in the 20th century, an explosion in the amount, the first graph here on your right, sorry, your left, is the amount of material that is consumed in the global economy. That's an absolute explosion throughout the 20th century as the economy grew and as populations grew all around the world. And on this graph is the growth of carbon emissions and also the rise in GDP. And they are completely and inextricably linked. And this is this idea that as the economy grows, we need to take stuff from the planet to be able to allow it to grow. We need to build, the built environment. We need to, energy to be able to run things, run the economy, all the rest of it, and then pushed out in the atmosphere the outputs of that. Okay. We'll not go into this here, but look, basically the idea is there is a fixed amount of energy coming into the world. It comes from the sun, as we know, right? This is all basic stuff that we learned in school. We're just connecting this to the idea of what the economy is. It is not growing. That amount of energy is not growing. It turns itself into solar energy or renewable energy, or it's stored in fossil fuels, or it's soaked up by plants to create food, or whatever it is. This is what the economy used to look like 100 years ago. It's an empty world, what ecological economists would call it. Now it is a full world, right? We are at capacity, and the Earth is paying for it. There's failing sort of planetary systems, biodiversity wipe out, all of this, all the cheery stuff. So, you might have seen this, and I think Sean included a reference to it in his presentation as well. The planetary boundaries framework is something that a load of Swedish ecologists put together about 10 years ago to say, okay, what are our planetary limits? Well, we've actually breached about half a dozen of them at this stage, and climate change is only one of them. All right. So what's the upshot of all this? What's the summary of this idea of post-growth and degrowth, that we need a smaller and more sustainable economy? We need to reduce the amount of material and energy that we use. We need to reduce the amount of emissions and waste that we pump out into the world and into the environment. And we need to reduce the productive size of the economy. That's it, full stop. So, with all of the inequality that we've been talking about here today, all of the destitution that Seán was talking about, all of the destitution that exists in the global south, and we're not allowed to grow the economy, then how do we address these things? Well, if you accept the science and you accept that there are these finite planetary limits that just cannot be negotiated with, right? Economists, there's this idea that the idea of a non-growing economy is an anathema to economists. Well, the idea of a non-growing freaking planet is an anathema to ecologists, Then we have to accept that we need to redistribute. And that is just an unavoidable question. We have to redistribute income through tax and all the rest of it, but more importantly, and back to Seán's point, we need to redistribute the productive assets of the economy back in the communities and back in the workers' hands and all the rest of it. Okay. There's also this idea that growth has been, and this is now connecting it to the Irish unity picture, economic growth has been like this release valve of class conflict and class antagonism. Because if you can keep promising people that everybody will get richer all of the time, even though that's not the case, well then, people don't need to strike for better wages. They don't need to fight for more control, more democratic control in the economy. They just think the pie is going to keep growing. You've heard that phrase all the time from Tory politicians and so on. And we don't need to fight for that. Well, proponents of Irish unity increasingly are putting this idea that Irish unity will unleash waves of economic growth, tens of billions of additional euro into the economy, and we'll all be richer. It doesn't stack up, and it doesn't even pass the smell test, I think, increasingly to people, because they know when John Campbell, God help him, goes on the BBC and says, the economy is growing by 5% this year. Do we feel 5% richer? Does your community feel 5% richer? Or, to take this example, from the Good Friday Agreement in 1998 to 2018, the economy in the north grew by 50%. Is there 50% more mental health services in our communities? Is there 50% more social housing? Or for the back Arsenal and South Armagh, where I'm from, is there 50% more bus services coming out to rural areas? No. There's 50% more hotels, there's maybe 50% more this, that and the other. So this idea of growth, and it's just constantly put forward as this single big number that's supposed to be good for all of us. It doesn't tell us anything about what that growth actually is. It doesn't tell, the inequality element of it, doesn't tell you what's growing, it doesn't tell you the ecological cost, all of this. So the idea is we're moving away from this model that growth is good and growth is always good towards something that we can actually, improve our own well-being. And if we're moving towards something else, then what are these objectives? All right. And so this is the planetary effects. Utterly depressing, so we'll not get into it. But the way it is being described by David Wallace Wells, it is whatever you think about the planetary crisis at the moment, it is absolutely worse than that. We are living through the 6th mass extinction event. The last one was the wipeout of the dinosaurs, to give you an element of scale. Global heating and extreme late weather effects, so the stuff that you've seen in the Middle East this year, or what's happening, drought. There was 60-degree surface temperatures in Spain this summer. How are we going to grow food in 60-degree surface temperatures on the ground? Metabolic rift, this idea, as we're talking about the metabolism, like a rift between the ability of the earth to sustain the size of the economy as it exists, and bluntly, ecological, economic and social catastrophe. So, while depressing everybody, there are positive solutions to all of this, alright? So, what does this mean for the debate on Irish unification? Right now, the offer that's out there from the literature, from people who are pro-Irish unity, like myself and I assume many people in the room, the existing contributions on this say unity by economic growth, we'll wipe out this invention because we'll just keep growing and we'll do all of this, and that necessarily means growth by ecocide. So what I'm going to go through here are these sort of main contributions that are out there, and you can maybe say if you've heard or read some of these to date. So the first one is from Hübner van Ucke. There's actually 2 of these studies that were done. They estimated that if Irish unity had have happened in 2018, between 2018 and 2025, there would have been an additional 17 billion in the economy, all right? The way this would be achieved is by taking the neoliberal, the low corporate tax model that exists in the south today, importing it into the north, making the north even more neoliberal, and unleashing loads of growth that comes with it. And we'll get onto the social costs of that because we know they exist. Another one was done then post-Brexit to say that compared to if we had have stayed within the European Union, there would have been 28 billion more in the economy. And this sounds great, but as we know, if wages aren't increasing, where is this 28 billion going? It's going to profits and rents and landlords and all the rest of it. This is from the second one, from John Doyle, who is in Dublin City University. He basically said that he broke down the subvention to say that it isn't 9 or 10 billion, and it's not, okay, but by any best estimates, if you have a wee look at it, it's not even close. But there is a subvention of about 3 or 4 billion. And as you see, again, coming back to this idea of economic growth, the debate now needs to focus on public policy decisions necessary to support sustainable economic growth. Always growth, never asking, is it good for us and has it actually resulted in an improvement in our well-being? This one's hilarious. Now this is from a book, you've probably seen it. It's called Making Sense of United Ireland from Brendan O'Leary. It's out at the minute. It's good, like it's talking about, you know, how local government might look in a United Ireland or what the different models of political organisation might be and all this. Well, the only time climate change is like this, you know, the massive planetary crisis that we're facing, the only time it's even mentioned in the book is to say the transition to a green and softer energy paths will slow the Republic's growth capacity. So, the richer the Republic becomes, the easier it will be to bear the cost of unification, including, well, that's not necessary, but basically we need to grow, and climate change might actually be an opportunity to grow the economy, never realising the sort of link between the two. This one's from Thuman and Daly. Mark Daly is a Fianna Fáil senator in the Oireachtas. His idea was to cut public spending in the north by 1.7 billion. That means thousands of job losses in the public sector and healthcare and all the rest of it, and that's how we pay for Irish unity. McGuinness and Bergman again talking about the role of productivity and economic growth, and Paul Gosling, and this is absolutely atrocious and harmed him, low tax, FDI-led growth model and public spending cuts, and that's how we will achieve Irish unity. So when people, the argument that you're hearing now from, say, Ireland's Future or from, say, the mainstream proponents of Irish reunification, when they say that the economy will be better for us in a united Ireland, these are the ideas that they're based them on. Public spending cuts, neoliberalism, all right? So this is a summary of it. So maintain the low corporate tax rate that exists in the south, that's 12.5%, and it's one of the lowest in the EU. In fact, it's one of the lowest in the world. Low public spending that comes with that, because the south is one of the lowest public spending governments in the European Union. Okay, FDI-led neoliberal growth model, so that's just, again, use that low corporate tax to bring in all this investment from overseas, and we'll base it on that. Cost reduction through public spending cuts. Reliance on austerity and neoliberal growth regime to absorb the subvention. So this idea, you've all heard about obviously the subvention that exists in the north. That's how we'll get rid of it. Absolutely no detailed consideration of the planetary emergency. Not one mention of climate change and the fact that, put it this way, it's 25 years since the Good Friday Agreement or thereabouts, isn't it, next year? The Maldives will be underwater in the next 25 years. That's the scale of the crisis we're facing, and we need to incorporate that into Irish unity, into any republic that's going to exist in the future that needs to be sustainable. All right. And then little consideration of the well-known social costs of the FDI growth model. This idea again of growth as the release valve. If we keep growing the economy, we don't need to worry about the fact that Ireland is one of the most unequal countries in Europe, or the OECD. So why is this ecologically unsustainable? All right. This here fancy looking graph is something called the ecological footprint, which you've probably heard about in an individual basis. But it looks at the amount of ecological pressure the southern economy, now this is based on the south, places on the earth versus the ability of the earth to be able to support that and sustain that. This declining green line won't shock anyone. That is the biocapacity. That is the basis, the ecological basis of the south. And we breached our ability to support ourselves in ecological terms in 1969. It has only got worse since. And that's because we are wiping out forests and more use of land and stuff for the agricultural sector. In terms of the material consumption that I was talking about, this metabolic idea of the economy, the amount of material and energy that we're actually using, the south of Ireland is one of the highest in the developed world. It's about 25 tonnes of material per person every single year that's used just for the economy to go about its yearly sort of operation. In the north, it's not a hell of a lot better. It's about 16 tonnes per capita. Emissions in the south, this is unbelievable. It's one of the worst in the world, okay? Because it is quite easy now at the moment to reduce emissions by insulating people's homes or shifting to public transport. Despite all that, despite the fact that wealth in the Republic has boomed in the last 20 years, emissions are 10% higher now than they were in 1990, sorry. And we need to cut emissions by about 7 or 8% every year out to 2050, okay? And cut them in half by 2030, that's not going to happen. 19% lower in the north than in 1990, but that's actually stagnated since about 2016, so emissions haven't actually gone down at all. And again, that idea in your head. By the way, when the whole world economy shuts down because of COVID, emissions I think fell by 2 or 3%. Again, back to that figure, 7% every single year. All right. Now this one it blew my mind whenever you're basing on this. What the ecological footprint framework also does is projects to say, if the whole world economy operated on the basis of economy X, how many planets would we need to sustain it? Well, if the whole world economy operated on the basis of the Irish economy in the south, we would need 3 planet Earths to sustain it. And you don't need to be an advanced planetary scientist to figure out we don't have them unless you're one of these dickheads like Elon Musk. Material circularity, right? So that's basically the amount of material that we reuse in the economy. That's at 1.6% in the south. It's the second lowest in the EU. We're just constantly extracted from the earth. So this is the scale of unsustainability that exists on the current economic model that exists in the south, and the proponents of Irish unity in the mainstream are saying we're going to have to base our economy on. It's fantasy stuff. So why is it socially unsustainable? What you do get with this model is massive sectors of growth and huge economic expansion in urban hubs and some parts of those urban hubs. So this is a study done by the Nevin Economic Research Institute in the south. So the all-Ireland average here is figure 100. Dublin is 85% more productive than the rest of the economy. Belfast again is more, but what you're seeing is the sites of economic growth are based overwhelmingly in Dublin, Belfast and in Cork, and only some parts of those cities, as you all know. Look at the northwest, look at the border region, look at Connacht. Yeah. So this idea also about the subvention, that the north is uniquely unproductive and it's can't pull its weight in the United Ireland and all the rest of it. Say the plantation of Ulster happened to Connacht instead, and there was a 6-county state carved out of Connacht. We would today be talking about the massive subvention that exists between Connacht and the rest of it. We'll be able to support Connacht in United Ireland. There are subventions that exist all across the island. These growth centres are located in, as we say, FDI hubs in Dublin and in Belfast. But the basis of the growth model in the south is basically that these companies, even though they pay fuck all tax, they are so profitable that the state gets a hell of a lot of tax from them, okay, even though the rate is quite low. This is from the Task Institute this year. Market inequality in Ireland is the most unequal, together with Romania and Bulgaria, in all of the European countries and in the OECD, and it's even higher than the United States of America. Mind blowing. But what happens is, because the productivity and the profitability of some of these companies, they're taxed and then that's paid out in social welfare payments, so it balances out a wee bit. But if there wasn't that tax coming from, say, PayPal and Google and Apple and all these, this would be the state of affairs. We would be like South Africa levels of inequality or United States levels of inequality. So, but that is also on the horizon. We might actually dry up these sort of corporate tax things. So this figure will blow your minds. 10% of companies pay 11% of all, 10 companies, just 10 companies in the south, pay 11% of all tax collected by the state. 10 companies. If these 10 companies leave, you're talking a whole of around 8 billion in the state. And what happens then? We don't rebalance this stuff, and we do end up with. So the model that exists at the moment is completely unsustainable, and you've seen what's happening with Elon Musk and Twitter and all the rest of it. There's experts talking about this could be the tip of the iceberg for the big tech firms that exist in Ireland, and they could be going overseas. And if that happens and these 10 companies leave, we are left with staggering inequality and none of that sort of rebalancing that we're talking about that we all need. Again, this is the model that apparently Irish Unity will be based on. Alright? This also, you'll see in a lot of the debate as well that there's comparisons made between the South and with Britain. Britain is a shit show at the minute, as we all know, and I just think included there maybe is a wee pithy point, but it's a very low bar to set in the debate. We should be looking at, say, Nordic countries or other high-income countries that are more equal with better public services and all the rest of it as what the state might look like in the United Ireland. Alright, so to wrap up, unity by economic growth has no ecological or scientific credibility. We cannot keep growing the economy at the rate it is going and expect to meet our emissions targets or our biodiversity targets or whatever it is. Excuse me. If we want to avoid the collapse of planetary life systems. Does it have social credibility? I don't think it does. And actually, I don't think in political terms this idea that we're going to tell people that this FDI-based model is going to be the means by which unity is achieved and it's going to make us all richer. I don't think that passes the smell test anymore. I think look at what's happening in social terms in Dublin or in Belfast or in the west of the island. They know that it's not working and they can see the inequality around them. So it's not even a politically popular proposal anymore. And therefore, we need something new and we need something different. The reunification debate must be grounded in ecological reality, and Irish unity then must be based on new and post-growth political economy. It didn't go into, say, what that might look like because it's a hell of a lot of economics, it's boring and all the rest of it, but what we're putting here in front, I suppose, is today is the picture as exists at the minute and the case for Irish unity that exists. So if we need then new targets, well, people would always say we need to grow the economy to be able to improve our well-being or to get full employment, all the rest of it. The exact opposite is the case. Even though labour productivity is increasing every year, we are working more and more, which it should be the opposite. I mean, if you're being more productive by 5% every year, that means that you can work 5% less and still make the same income or get 5% more. So what about focusing on our well-being? What about full employment? What about redistribution? What about more leisure time in the 4-day week? All right, all of these opportunities are opened up by a post-growth economy. If we say we don't need to keep growing for its own sake, then we can have more objectives within society. Resilient community economies, like the stuff Seán was talking about, restoration of nature, inequality and poverty. Why not put these as the main targets for what a united Ireland can solve and what a new economic model might look like, instead of saying that growth, which is both impossible and undesirable, will be the means of achieving it. And I'll leave you with that thought and maybe discussion, folks. That's it. Thank you.
Seán, I remember the People's Assembly a couple of months back, and it was your colleague John Barry made that great point about growth for growth's sake. And what was it based on? Was it growth for growth's sake is the ideology of a cancer cell?
Yeah, that's it.
So, and that there hit the nail on the head for me, and that was a room full of retail, N&I, business, community, accountants, yada yada yada. And that's basically what it is. If we're basing the economy on GDP or whatnot, and just for growth, you're mimicking a cancer cell, and that's just what I'm seeing outcome.
Yeah.
That's wild.
I feel afraid. I'm like a bit overwhelmed, as in like there's so much to do, but if people like you were in the room, it would make a core difference, and I think voices like yours need to be heard front and centre. People who know what they're talking about with regards to things like this.
Yeah.
I feel really lucky to have listened to you today, and I think we need you in the room, big lad.
But it's that idea, the kind of crisis is terrifying, there's no way about it, and if you do spend a lot of your time thinking about it, as myself and maybe Seán and others do, it can get the better of you, but the solutions are those that will make life fucking better. Warmer homes, cheaper energy, community-owned energy, all of these things. It is not an unpopular sale to say that we need a greener economy or a more socialist one, because they're both interlinked about solving the planetary crisis. What we don't have is politicians that are willing to stand up and say things have got to change. They can change for the better and point a positive vision for people. The stuff that we're talking about here, working less. Jesus Christ, that'd be brilliant. Looking after ourselves more, your mental and physical well-being, all this. But we don't have that. There's no bravery to even put out a popular vision. It's just that, listen, things can keep going the way they're going, even though evidentially they can't.
It's almost like that. The Ireland's future, that framework is almost right. There's a 40% undecided. Unionist who we can send it here. We can convince that we can do capitalism better. We can do capitalism better.
Get them in the room and then.
Let's get them in.
You can be shit per in the south now.
Do you know what I mean here? And obviously strategically, there's reasons. There's good like electoral reasons for that in terms of winning that short term argument. But the conversations need to be completely recalibrated. It's just we're just thinking of, and this is why this forum is so important. Is this the conversation around the type of Ireland we want to have is based on looking at the type of Ireland we now have You know what I mean? Rather than going, how do we imagine something completely and totally different? You know, an island economy which serves the people, in which we're living,
nature.
With nature and people are living in tandem. There should be enough resources to do that.
Like if you think of what Bolsonaro was doing there and what he got away with, you know, and you think of this island and how it was completely robbed of all its riches and the trees that built half of the empire, and if you imagine that we could have a better society based on all of the things that have been discussed today, if there was the political will, and I think it's up to people to drive that. And what Niall was saying about the Ireland's future, while I have enjoyed both events that I went to, the last event struck me that there seemed to be a very middle class tone. There seemed to be a very, there was very few working class.
The one in Dublin or in Belfast?
No, the Ulster Hall.
I was at the one in Dublin, and it felt like a US American
Presidential type.
yeah, fucking load of pop music piped in and all. But like,
I do think there probably is an element of trying to win voters who are never going to vote. You know, like all of the people in this room probably don't need to be swayed, and I do think they are targeting certain people. And I did enjoy listening to the panel that were like 5 people from traditional unionist backgrounds, but even the 5 that were there, I think Bardley and Bradley were non-working class. They were all very much came from...
How we're all going to be richer. And
yeah, you know.
Not only is it pie in the sky, but like this idea, the fact that this is based on irrefutable climate evidence and all the rest now that exists, right? If you try and make a socialist case for Irish unity on its own moral terms, which we would all do, and which we, obviously that's what we want, well then you're going to be faced with the typical, alright, yeah, the pie in the sky stuff and socialist utopia, all this sort of stuff. If you tell them that we absolutely need to do this for the sake of the planet, for it to be further and to be any form of civilization in the next century or two, well then that's a different conversation, and you have to, you know, it's based on an evidence base that people can't just throw away so handily. And then I think as socialists and trying to influence that Irish unity debate, well that's your Trojan horse, isn't it? Get the stuff in about climate emergency, even as a tactic, to start bringing in more radical ideas.
Just thinking even how the Andrew mobilised, how do you get our young people to mobilise around the message which you have just said? Because I think our young people are ultimately the ones that will listen and drive.
Seán, in terms of other sustainable or almost sustainable economic models, do we know of examples that exist in other countries? I know there are some countries that would be more economically sustainable in terms of how they work their economies and how they gear them up and stuff like that. Seán, because we need to give people hope here as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, and that it actually can be done in a way that is to redistribute the resources which are indeed finite, you know, and to prioritise, be it education, be it leisure and the fitness and well-being of the residents, like, you know, and how it can be done in a better way. Can you
Surely, absolutely. So, on like just to pick up on Sean's point, the reason, or Sean's presentation, the reason why that is more ecologically sustainable and it's more post-growth is that cooperatives don't work on the basis of trying to realise a fucking massive profit margin at the end of the year to pay off to their shareholders or to buy more shit to grow and grow and grow for its own sake. They will give that to each other, or they'll just do what the business needs to do. So a more cooperative economy is a less growing one. I know it sounds bad, but it is great. Also look at Japan, right? It's not sustainable in ecological terms, but the Japanese economy hasn't grown essentially in 5, 6, 7 years. It's all up at 1.01 or 0.02%. People say, oh, it's a basket case and it's not growing anywhere. Highest life expectancy in the world. Fantastic public transport, education, all the rest of it. And these are the things, if you're putting, say, social targets in place that we want to live better and longer lives and all the rest of it, and design the economy around achieving these things, and not just growth as like this indirect way of achieving that, because it doesn't, then that's an example as well of like a really rich developed country. Again, it's not sustainable. And then the other one is Cuba. Cuba is within, it's a poor country by international standards, but the level of productivity that exists in, say, Ireland or other high income countries means that we could produce more income than, say, a society like Cuba with the same ecological impact. And they're within their sustainable development targets, their land use and all the rest of it.
maximum power where you are, exactly where you are, you know. And this place seems to have a great, you know, it's got inspiration from the Gheimhridh, you know, Charles Road. Built their own houses, built their own schools, and then during the war, then built 31 houses after Bombay Street was born. In the middle of a conflict. And yet, people are getting, you know, just told a lot of shit about Maggie's, you know. And the institutions of power are actually bending their own rules. Stop you getting what you need. You know, and do you think, see, during a pandemic, well, it's still on, like, for a lot of people. But politicians were forced to follow the science. You know, do you think we could bring that back to, you need to follow the science here?
I think so, but the difficulty is the upshot of that then is if people have to accept that the economy can't grow anymore, then a hell of a lot of rich people, billionaires, millionaires would be like, well, you know, I want it to keep growing. It's this idea, it's like hegemonic, that growth is actually good for all of us, and it's just not. There is no, you know, I keep coming back to the idea that the economy has just exploded in size on paper since the Good Friday Agreement, but where's the real sort of material basis of that in our lived experiences in the North? There's a great quote from during the Brexit debate. Tim Jackson always talks about it, and there's a Labour politician and a Tory politician, a Leave and Remain, and they're talking about how Brexit, either remaining in or remaining out, would be massive for GDP. You know, it would be like, here, fucking, we'll grow more for in the European, we'll grow more for outside it and all the rest of it. They're talking about GDP and all the rest of it. And some fella shouts from the back of the room, listen, stop talking about fucking GDP. That's your GDP, it's not ours. So it's a community that hasn't seen a material improvement in 20, 30 years, but they're being told the economy grows every year. You know, so I thought that was a good way, maybe just getting across as you're saying, we're being told every year the economy's growing. Well, like, does West Belfast see that? Does South Armagh see it? Definitely not. You know, but there's certainly people in society who are seeing it.
I do think we'll just half an hour before talking now. It was some day there.
It's a brilliant day.
I want to give an hour Chatting to Scoil Gheimhridh, it was a great weekend. We had Jan Smart Focus last night, and we had a range of great discussions today from 11 onwards, and it's all recorded. And even just, I mean, central to the whole thing was something that I heard from John Barry as well, quoting somebody else, a Brazilian sort of ecologist, who said that, you know, climate action without the class aspect is just gardening.
Absolutely.
And I think it's the same thing for each one. There's Irish language, housing, mental health, and then the other range of issues that we haven't got to today, maybe next time. And it's echoed by O'Kane when he talks about the ruling class and the injustice, and that we need to fight on behalf and with the most vulnerable and the poorest in society. And it's also in general with the Irish unity, and that old Vladimir Lenin quote is when he says that, you know, liberals will talk about equality and democracy in general, but the Marxists will never forget to ask for what class. For Irish unity, but for what class?
Yeah.
And that's, I think, something that's central to this whole weekend. And hopefully in the new year and in spring, maybe we can start a new school, a school spring, or a spring school, Scoil Gheimhridh. I hate getting on. And it doesn't have to be in Gordon Moore, it can be somewhere else. And some of the organisations that were here, or some of the activists that were here could host it. And that's something that I think we should continue to gather, to continue this conversation and have some sort of outcome that can come from these. You know, yesterday we were talking about a charter or a programme of points where we can put two into this conversation that's garnering momentum. I think it's something that's realistic if we can do that. We're not going to free Ireland overnight, but we can at least have something like that where we can work towards. Hopefully then everyone here will be there again and in the new year. But Garmargo Bridge.